The earth groaned. It was a low, grinding sound that traveled up through the soles of the feet, a vibration born from a world fracturing under its own weight. Everywhere, the air tasted of stagnant heat and old smoke. Paths that had once been clear were now choked by debris and the remnants of petty disputes. Malice hung in the atmosphere, tangible and thick, turning the horizon a bruised, sickly shade of gray. Every movement in the streets was erratic, fueled by a collective, restless aggression. Yet, in the center of this crumbling landscape, there was a point of absolute stillness. Noah stood on a rise of barren ground, his posture rigid, eyes fixed on a distant point beyond the chaos. He did not mirror the surrounding frenzy. He did not shout back at the noise or succumb to the frantic pace of the crowds below. He remained anchored. While the rest of the world dissolved into a blur of frantic, self-serving violence, he breathed with a steady, measured rhythm. He was a singular, upright shadow in a sea of shifting, frantic movement. The corruption surged around him like a tide, but it did not touch him. He watched the horizon, waiting, as the ground beneath the valley shuddered once more. The command did not come from the wind or the earth. It arrived as a pressure behind the eyes, sharp and inescapable. "Build an ark," the voice echoed. It defined the space, 300 cubits long, 50 wide, 30 high. It specified the medium, gopher wood, sealed with pitch at every seam. Noah stood motionless. The dimensions played out in his mind, a colossal, skeletal frame looming over the valley floor. He did not look for a second opinion. He did not ask for the reason. He turned away from the horizon and walked to the edge of the clearing where the timber grew thick and wild. He gripped the handle of his axe, the grain of the wood pressing against his palms. He swung. The blade bit deep into the trunk, sending a spray of splinters into the air. The sound echoed across the valley, a sharp, singular report that broke the heavy stillness of the day. He pulled the axe back and swung again. The rhythm of the work had begun. With every strike, the world he knew receded, replaced by the immediate, biting resistance of the timber and the singular necessity of the task. He moved to the next tree, his focus narrowing to the steel, the wood, and the work ahead. Years bled into one another, measured only by the height of the timber frame. Noah and his sons dragged massive, unhewn beams across the clearing, their shoulders raw and calloused from the friction of the rough wood. They hoisted heavy planks onto the growing skeleton of the vessel, muscles straining and trembling under the weight. At the perimeter, the crowd gathered daily. They shouted jeers, their voices rising in a discordant swell, and threw stones that clattered against the wooden base. Noah did not look up. He wiped sweat from his eyes, the salt stinging, and dipped his wide brush into the vat of thick black pitch. He coated the wood, layer by heavy layer, sealing the seams until the surface glistened. His sons mirrored the motion, their breathing ragged, chests heaving with every lift. When a stone struck a plank near his hand, Noah simply adjusted his grip on the brush and continued the stroke. The work was the only reality that mattered. The structure loomed over the valley, a dark, silent monolith that grew higher with every passing season, indifferent to the stones that fell and the voices that screamed. The horizon began to shift. It was not the wind, but a low, rhythmic vibration that traveled through the soles of Noah's feet. From the edges of the plains and the deep shadows of the forests, the world moved. Elephants thundered in a slow, heavy cadence that shook the dust from the air. Tiny rabbits darted in frantic, erratic bursts, keeping pace with the steady, measured stride of lions that walked with their heads held low. There was no sound of struggle, only the collective rustle of fur and the thud of thousands of feet on packed earth. Noah stood at the threshold of the wooden hull, his hand resting on the massive unhewn timber frame. He signaled, and the pairs filed forward. The dark wooden belly of the vessel swallowed them whole, a vast space breathing with the heat of living things. He guided the last pair, a pair of birds, silent and quick into the shadows. Noah stepped back onto the ramp, checked the horizon one final time, and stepped inside. The heavy door groaned, the wood protesting against the hinges, and swung shut. A wooden bar dropped into place with a final, echoing thud. The outside world vanished, leaving only the sound of breathing in the dark. 7 days passed in absolute, suffocating silence. Then the sky fractured. A crack of thunder tore through the air, sharp as a whip, and the heavens opened. Rain did not fall in drops. It descended in solid, white sheets that hammered the earth with unrelenting force. Noah pressed his palm against the inner wall, feeling the vessel shudder as the ground beneath them began to heave. It was not a tremor, but a rupture. Fountains of the deep burst upward, geysers of mud and stone erupting through the crust of the valley floor. The fields vanished, swallowed by the rising, churning surge. Villages that had stood for generations were swept away, their structures splintering against the force of the incoming tide. The water rose with terrifying speed, foaming and black, racing toward the high ground. Fields were replaced by a chaotic, swirling ocean. The land was no longer a solid foundation, but a memory, buried under the weight of the rising sea. Every direction turned to gray, churning water as the ark groaned, lifted from its resting place, and began to drift into the heart of the storm. The water continued its relentless ascent, fueled by the relentless barrage from above and the deep earth geysers below. Familiar landmarks became casualties of the tide. A forest ridge, then a jagged cliffside, and finally, the highest mountain peak in the valley slipped beneath the surface. The brown, frothing water smoothed over, hiding the ruins of a civilization that no longer existed. The ark climbed with the surge, a solitary wooden shell riding the back of an endless, churning expanse. There was no north or south anymore, only the gray, undulating horizon that stretched until it met the dark, weeping clouds. The vessel groaned, its massive beams flexing against the pressure of the deep. Noah looked out through a narrow slit, but there was nothing to see. No trees, no birds, no earth. The silence of the ocean was absolute, punctuated only by the rhythmic slapping of waves against the hull. The world of stone and soil was gone, leaving the ark as the only speck of life in an ocean that spanned the entire globe. A profound, hollow stillness settled over the deck as the last of the peaks disappeared, leaving the vessel to drift in a vast, terrifying solitude. 40 days of relentless fury. The ark tilted at impossible angles, sliding down the face of massive swells, only to be slammed upward again by the crushing force of the deep. Inside, the air grew heavy and thick. It tasted of wet fur, stale breath, and the sharp, suffocating scent of fresh pitch. Noah moved through the lower decks, his hands gripping the support beams until his knuckles turned white. Every time the hull groaned, a spray of icy water forced its way through the seams, misting the dark space. Suddenly, a violent impact jarred the entire structure. A massive piece of debris, the remnant of a forest, had collided with the side. The vessel shuddered, throwing animals into a frantic, panicked scramble. Noah lunged for a heavy timber, wedging it against a buckling beam to prevent the frame from snapping. His boots slipped on the sodden, straw-covered floor. He gritted his teeth, bracing his back against the wood, fighting the momentum of the sea. The vessel held, but the storm showed no mercy. Thunder rattled the very heart of the ark, and the darkness inside seemed to press in from all sides. A constant reminder that they were nothing more than a fragile shell held together by faith and raw, physical labor. The violent motion eventually faded into a slow, rhythmic rocking. 150 days of drifting through a featureless, gray expanse had numbed the senses of everyone aboard. Noah climbed the ladder to the upper deck, his joints stiff from the months of confinement. He pushed the hatch open and felt the air. It was still, damp, and empty. He reached into a cage and released the raven. The bird circled the ark, its black wings beating against the heavy fog. But it found no place to land and eventually drifted back to the roof. Noah waited another 7 days, his patience stretched thin by the silence. He released the dove. The white bird took flight, disappearing into the mist. Hours passed.
The sun began to dip toward the horizon when the dove reappeared, fluttering down to the deck. Noah knelt,
his hands trembling slightly as he reached out. Tucked into the bird's beak was a fresh, green olive leaf.
The water was receding. The earth was finally breathing again. The heavy,
suffocating weight of the last few months snapped, replaced by the sharp, undeniable clarity of survival. The drift finally ended not with a splash, but with a shuddering, metallic groan that vibrated through the floorboards. The ark pitched forward, then settled. A deep, grinding sound of wood scraping against jagged rock echoed through the lower chambers, silencing the animals. Noah gripped the railing, his knuckles white, as the vessel listed slightly to the port side and held firm. They had struck land. He moved toward the main hatch, his boots thudding against the damp planks. He pulled the iron latch, the mechanism protesting with a screech of rusted metal. With a final heave, the massive door swung outward. A rush of cold, thin air flooded the interior, smelling of wet stone and clean, stagnant water. Noah stepped across the threshold. His feet sank immediately into soft, dark mud that clung to his soles. He looked out over the horizon. The peaks of Ararat emerged from the retreating mist like teeth biting into the gray sky. Everything was still. The relentless rhythm of the waves was gone, replaced by a profound, heavy silence that pressed against his ears. He stood there, alone in the quiet, feeling the cold moisture of the earth seeping through his boots, marking the first step of a new world. Noah moved with deliberate focus, gathering jagged stones from the slope and piling them into a rough, low square. His hands were caked in dried mud, but he worked until the structure stood firm against the damp wind. He searched the nearby debris for dry brush, finding a brittle patch of wood that had survived the flood. He crouched, struck the flint, and watched as a tiny spark caught the fiber. A thin ribbon of gray smoke spiraled upward, drifting toward the heavy, overcast sky. Noah stood back, his chest rising and falling in the cool air. The animals moved in the distance, finding their way into the vast, empty valley. Suddenly, the ceiling of the world shifted. The gray clouds tore open, and a shaft of piercing, golden light struck the earth. Noah shielded his eyes. Across the horizon, a brilliant arc began to materialize, a shimmering band of red, gold, and deep blue. It stretched from one mountain peak to the other, a vibrant bridge of color against the fading storm. The voice resonated in the stillness, a silent oath etched in light. The waters would never again rise to claim the world. The arc burned bright, a final, radiant seal on the horizon, as the earth settled into a new, quiet peace.